Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 p.m. now, just after 1 p.m. In Cape Town time. And very good welcome to everybody listening in. We're also streaming live on Facebook as well. So how's it to everyone on Facebook? And thanks for joining us. Our very first online webinar with myself, Justin Asher. I'm the head of strategy and marketing at upnup. And with me, we've got Grant James, the head of business development at Stitch, and our very own product owner at upnup, Ricky Allardyce. Ricky is actually dialing in with us from London at the moment, and Grant is here in Cape Town with me as well. So how's it, everyone? And thanks for joining us. In South Africa, we have a pretty poor savings culture. And I think everyone knows that, well, we all try and save as much as we can, but in reality, we don't really take much interest in it or really take it seriously. And I think at the beginning of the start of COVID, when it hit, nobody knew what was coming, nobody knew what was going to happen. And I think at the end of it now, 2 years later, we're probably all looking back and saying, geez, if only I'd put some savings aside, if only I'd actually started saving 5 or 6 years ago. And things in South Africa, or even globally, really, investment options, savings options, they're really complex. There's so much to think about. There's so much to look at. And understandably, it can become incredibly overwhelming when we're trying to set up our future and plan for what's to come in the years ahead of us. But what's really interesting is, no matter how complex that is, we're constantly reminded how expensive life has become. It really is. It's everywhere, right? You open your phone, your friends and your WhatsApp groups are telling you life is expensive. Look at the price of this. Look at the price of that. We're sharing photos from the local supermarket of the price of meat, the price of bread, the price of milk. And of course, those in South Africa will know the price of petrol again going up. I think it's getting almost 26 Rand a litre now. So all these prices are just skyrocketing, and we're constantly, no matter where we turn, we're constantly being reminded about how expensive life has become. But at the same time, we're still spending. We're still constantly spending when we go out for dinner. We're spending on utilities, electricity, petrol, all these things we're still spending. So what if we were to just form a habit to save as we spend? What if we just saved every time we spend, we put a little bit aside? Every time we paid our rent, we put a little bit aside. What if we could do that? And that's really where we come in. We're introducing upnup, Africa's first passive micro saving and investment app. It allows you to accumulate Bitcoin on autopilot, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. But most importantly, it allows you to save as you spend. Now, with upnup, you don't have to wait until payday to start saving. You can automatically set stats, and we're going to talk more about what stats actually are and how that fits into the app. You can convert your savings back to ZAR. So don't worry if you don't want to keep your savings in Bitcoin, that's okay. You can convert them straight back to ZAR. One of the key features of this app is that you can literally set and forget it. Once you've done your savings preferences, you've signed up, you set up your wallet, you've set your savings preferences, set it, forget it, and allow upnup to do all the work. And when you're ready, when the time's come to go on holiday or spend your savings, however you wish to do so, you can withdraw those savings. So this literally is the most convenient savings mechanism on the planet. And that's why it makes sense to microsave with upnup. And throughout the rest of the webinar here, for the next 40 or so minutes, we're going to talk to Ricky and Grant a little bit, dive a little bit deeper into what the product is, and really understand why it makes sense to use upnup. So without further ado, I'm going to stop the screen share. And there's Ricky. He's at the bottom of my screen. And there's Grant as well. So welcome, guys, and good to have you on board.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Justin. Glad to be here, man.
Yep, very happy to be here.
Thanks for joining, guys. So, Ricky, I'm going to jump straight into it. I'm going to ask you to maybe just introduce yourself, a little bit about, what do you do at UpNup? And, in a nutshell, that whole elevator pitch, what does UpNup actually do?
Cool. Yeah. So I'm the product owner at upnup. So that means I am responsible for what the product looks like and what actually gets put into our roadmap, what gets built. I also cooked up this idea. It's been something I've been thinking about for quite a while. And, I was just looking around the market and I was like, I just want to accumulate Bitcoin as passively as possible, as frequently as possible. And there's no product in the market that lets me do that. So I decided, let's try to build it. Pitched it to the investors. They liked the idea and, 8-9 months later, here we are. And we've got an MVP product in the market, and we're just busy with our release of our beta version right now, which is the upgrade of the MVP. So yeah, things are looking good.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. And Grant, maybe just an introduction from your side. You're from Stitch. A lot of people probably don't know who Stitch is. So maybe just an introduction, what does Stitch do, and who you are and what your role at Stitch is.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Hopefully they'll have a good idea of what Stitch does after this webinar. But it's Grant, I head up business development at Stitch. And essentially Stitch is a fintech API that allows for easy access to users' financial accounts to enable payments and access to financial data. So as a company, our mission is to make it as easy as possible for businesses to launch and scale financial products and move money from consumer to business and business to consumer. So I'll give a little bit more context around what that looks like from an end user perspective. They would actually link their financial accounts the same way that they would a card, making use of internet banking credentials, actually linking your bank account to an app or platform for the purposes of either making a one-click payment, withdrawal, or sharing any financial data, so the transactions and balances that sit on the account. Now, from a business perspective, it actually means saving fees and costs versus other payment methods like card, or the ability to really easily send payouts, so disbursements, refunds, wherever they need to go. And as the head of business development, I spend the majority of my time speaking with companies, understanding their business goals, pain points, and then putting the right Stitch solution in place. So I get an opportunity to speak to lots of operators, founders, and essentially look to optimize what they have. And it's also how I met you cool guys. So that's a bit about me.
Awesome, Grant, thanks. So guys, before we continue and really dive deep into it, I just want to mention there's a Q&A function on Zoom. So those who are following on the webinar, please feel free to pop any questions into the Q&A. Please don't use the chat function because we're not going to be monitoring that, but we will monitor the Q&A, and we'll take questions from the floor a little later on. Also, please feel free to visit our website, upnup.co.za. You can download our app. It's available on Android. If you want to do that, you can do that right now or later after the webinar. But please feel free to, at any point in time, whether it's now in the Q&A or afterwards, feel free to reach out to us, chat to us anytime. Myself and Ricky, and even Grant for that matter, we're all available at any point in time. So feel free to reach out to us via our website, and we'll chat when you're ready. So, Ricky, I just want to jump straight into it because there's always the first question from someone when you're talking about Bitcoin and saving and putting money away into Bitcoin. What's your take on the crash, the so-called crash? Let's call it that. Should people be buying Bitcoin now? I mean, there's a lot of skepticism.
Yeah, man. It's understandable. And if you look at Bitcoin price action with a narrow time focus, like if you look at it like now over the last few months, obviously you'll be quite worried because you see Bitcoin has come down. Just zoom out though, guys. Like this is all you need to do. Take a step back and look at Bitcoin from a 5 to 10 year perspective, and you'll see that it has outperformed every other asset on earth by orders of magnitude. It's the best. The reason why we've chosen, and we'll probably get into this a bit later, but the reason why we chose Bitcoin specifically as a starting point asset for upnup is that it is the most pristine asset on earth. It is a limited supply of 21 million coins that can ever be created. No one can change that. And the same cannot be said for fiat currencies around the world. They will only inflate because governments will only ever print more money. And this is why as a product that we're trying to build, which allows for saving for over the long term, in small amounts, Bitcoin is perfect, because you're trying to take a long view. We're not a trading app, not trying to get people to buy and sell Bitcoin and try to game the market and make quick profits. This is a long-term investment platform. So Bitcoin is great for that because it's got a good track record. And we know for a fact that governments are going to keep printing money. So Bitcoin is your best bet to hedge against that. And it's exactly why we chose Bitcoin to start with. So I would just take this current price dip as a buying opportunity to accumulate more Bitcoin. Remember, you get more Bitcoin for your rands now when price is down. So take advantage.
Ricky, I spoke earlier in the little intro, I spoke about stacking sats. It's a buzzword that is probably very well known in the Bitcoin community, but when we talk about stacking sats, not many people know what we're talking about. Well, what are we saying?
Right, so sats is short for Satoshi, and a Satoshi is like the smallest unit of Bitcoin. So like you have cents in rands, you've got Satoshis in Bitcoin. So one Bitcoin is made up of 100 million Satoshis. So when we say stacking sats, that means you're just stacking sats, you're accumulating Bitcoin. And that's exactly what our app does. It's trying to, it empowers you to just accumulate Bitcoin every week on autopilot. Your number of Bitcoin that you earn just keeps going up. And forget about the rand value over the short term. Over the long term, obviously, it's very important, your purchasing power. But yeah, you just want to keep stacking Bitcoin as much as possible. That's the game. Just get as much as you can. There's only 21 million. And the real end goal here is to increase your percentage share of those 21 million Bitcoin that'll ever exist. That's really the game.
You've been stacking sats for quite a long time now. You're not gonna. We know we don't ask how. we don't ask how many sats you've stacked, but you've been doing it for a long time. You've obviously seen the market go up and down. I mean, I think we shared a newsletter a couple of weeks ago about, or last week actually, about Bitcoin dying, I think, over 400 times already.
Yeah, so there's a great website called bitcoinobituaries.com, which tracks every time a journalist of renown publishes an article about why Bitcoin is dead. Paul Krugman et al. Have written many articles about why Bitcoin is dead, yet Bitcoin is still here. I've been reading these articles for sure close to 7 years now, and started reading the first ones that Bitcoin was dying when it was about $600 was the first one I read. Here we are now at $20,000. I mean, it's all noise. Don't pay attention to them. If those economists and those commentators were right, we wouldn't have the inflation we have today. So there's clearly something very much wrong with their models as to why inflation exists. So they're not particularly qualified to speak on Bitcoin because they can't even diagnose the problem with fiat money. So, yeah.
Grant, I'm going to bring you in. What's your take on the Bitcoin climate? I mean, is it the right time to, as Ricky said, start stacking sats?
Yeah, so I'm not a crypto expert, and nor would I ever claim to be, but I will say I am hodling right now. And if you're unfamiliar,
just explain, what does that mean?
If you're unfamiliar with the term, it's an acronym, HODL, so it's HODL, which means hold on for dear life. And with the market movements that are currently taking place, I think that it's a similar sentiment that's shared across the market. I think one thing is quite interesting, and was reading up on it a couple of days ago, but if you look at the total market capitalization of cryptocurrency, I think it hit a high at the end of November 2021. And if you contrast that to what we're seeing currently, I think the total market cap was like $3 trillion. And right now it sits at about $866 billion. So it's almost $2 trillion of market cap that's been wiped in the last in the last like 6 months or so. And there's a lot of contrasting opinions or conflicting opinions around like why this has happened. I think some of what I read and some that I thought was quite like relevant for Stitch is there was like one major opinion that said that this crash it centered around fraud and claims being the leading factor. And that was actually one of the reasons why us as Stitch started to focus a little bit more around how we can assist with like AML and fraud protection, just around users funding wallets and making payments across the crypto space. So it's something that we actually looked to safeguard. And I just thought it was interesting seeing that being one of the opinions that that had been pulled out. I think that there is a lot of like a lot of what Ricky had mentioned just around consumer sentiment and also a lot of the naysayers around the space. This is also an opportunity for them to perk up a little bit. But generally, I think that crypto has got quite a high adoption at the moment. And like all economic markets, I do a bit of reading on Ray Dalio. And there's an economic machine. I think crypto could be that new economic machine, and there will be ups and downs, highs and lows.
It's always fascinating when you ask people, what's your opinion on Bitcoin, or what's your thinking about the current Bitcoin climate. I mean, we could spend days and days talking about it and the positives around it, really, because there are so many positives to it. But Ricky, I want to bring you back in and just kind of touch on, there's a question in the Q&A, so I'm going to jump a little because I think it speaks to where we are right now. But just to maybe explain, bringing it back to upnup, explaining Bitcoin savings for someone that doesn't understand blockchain. I mean, why what is our app effectively is allowing you to save small amounts and automatically convert those small amounts into Bitcoin. So, maybe just explain it for someone saying, like, explain the Bitcoin savings if I don't understand the blockchain.
Okay, yeah. So a very relevant question, because the reason why we built upnup the way we built it, in that it's a custodial solution, we hold your Bitcoin for you, is that it's an entry point for people who don't necessarily have the knowledge of how blockchains work and function. Because if you want to take self-custody of your Bitcoin, in other words, withdraw it to the own wallet that you control the private keys to, you need to know what all of that means, and you need to know how to do it, because the one defining feature of Bitcoin is that you are responsible for your Bitcoin. There's no bank that can give you back your money if you mess it up. So what we do is we're like an entry point into the market for people. And one of the features that we bring out soon is Bitcoin withdrawals, which allows you to withdraw to your self-custody. So if you choose that you want to go the self-custody route, you can use us as an entry point and then take your Bitcoin off to your own self-custody wallet. But in the interim, while you're accumulating small amounts, and when you're first getting exposure to Bitcoin, it's much easier to have someone else handle that for you. And this is why we work with reputable institutions like Stitch and our backend providers who do the wallets for us, etc., so that people can rest assured that their Bitcoin is safe, and you don't have to actually know how a blockchain works. And I would recommend to everyone using our application, go and learn how blockchains work, but take the time to go and learn how, and I say blockchains, go and learn how Bitcoin works before anything else. And then once you're comfortable, take the self-custody of your Bitcoin and you're for away.
And
I don't know, did I answer your question there? Sorry.
Yeah, I think you did. I think definitely. But I want to stay on the safety aspect, because when a lot of people, they download our app, they open it up, one of the first things they have to do in order to actually utilize the app is link their bank account. Grant, I'm sure you guys get this on a daily basis. Like, the number one question, is it safe for me to link my bank account?
Yes. So I think with a lot of this and a lot of innovation and new technologies in the market, it actually requires a bit of education, right? So a bit of user education around the specific systems and processes that are put in place. And I think a lot of that fear actually stems from access to someone's bank account, and do they know my internet banking credentials, because I'm putting them in. And the answer to that is no. So explaining what that process looks like, a user needs to link their bank account. What they will do is they'll input the internet banking credentials. When inputting those internet banking credentials, what actually happens is they are encrypted. Those credentials are then tokenized. They're stored in a key vault. So we have an industry-leading partnership with Microsoft, Key Vault and Azure, to actually store those credentials. They're then tokenized, and we would pass a token of those credentials for that access to the account, right? So when we step it back, credentials aren't being viewed. They're anonymized, tokenized, and encrypted when input. The token is then passed for any access. So that actually means that the user is somewhat protected through that process, right? We've also endeavored, just from a security and compliance perspective, to comply with some of the highest grade standards around APIs. So we comply with something called the FAPI, which is a financial grade API, and also have other industry leading partnerships with OpenID Connect, O2Auth, which is actually the same sort of security mechanisms that Google make use of. And then we also apply the OWASP top 10 mitigations for any specific compliance or security as well.
So pretty much, Grant.
And
go for it, Ricky.
So, sorry, Justin, if I could just jump in there, something as well. You're obviously aware of this, but when we were building UpNup in the initial phases and planning how to do this, fraud was one of our biggest concerns with acquiring funds. And this is something that I only learned when we started doing the deep dive into it, because we had to decide, how do we acquire users' funds onto our platform? So we had the Stitch way of doing things, which is a relatively new way of doing it, which is a EFT platform essentially. So it's being transferred from a user's bank account to our bank account. And the normal conventional option that you have available is the card rail, which is a user putting in their card details and paying by a card. Turns out fraud on cards is way higher. I mean, fraud on the EFT rail is essentially zero. I mean, Grant, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the fraud rate that you guys have encountered is literally zero, as opposed to the fraud that you see taking place on cards, which is a regular occurrence people know about.
Yeah,
so from
across. So sorry, Ricky, I'll just jump in there. Across the card rail, what you get is something called reversal as well as chargebacks. And that's essentially a user initiated process that drastically increases what fraud looks like. So for instance, an example is I fund my upnup wallet. What I then do is I fund it via card. I then go to my bank and I say, that was not me. The bank reverses the transactions, but what's happened on the upnup side is you've already credited my account, right? That's essentially fraud. We do not see that fraud through EFT channels, because what a user actually needs is they would need their internet banking credentials. They would go through a multi-factor authentication from the bank when linking that bank account. And that's an additional security layer to ensure that it is this user's bank account when linking. And then they actually link that bank account, and payments can seamlessly be made from that linked bank account into the beneficiary account, which is the upnup wallet.
Yeah, so just to tie that up, I mean, from our perspective as a business, it's a no-brainer for us to go the EFT route, the Stitch route, rather than the card route. This is why we don't allow for card payments on our platform, because you have that chargeback risk, you have that fraud risk, where it's just much more secure with going the EFT route that Stitch provides, and that protects our customers and it protects us. So all in all, when people look at this and they're concerned about putting in my banking credentials, what people must understand is that this is actually far more secure than using your credit card.
And I mean, just to reiterate, we obviously don't store any of that data. We don't see it. So, you know, it's one of the fastest growing, and I say this because I've seen it on e-commerce platforms, but instant EFT is one of the fastest growing. It seems to be one of the fastest growing payment methods out there, if not the fastest. So, yeah, it's definitely something new, isn't it? Ricky, I
just want to touch on a point that you mentioned around that. It definitely is one of the fastest growing methods, but that's also due to the addressability across the market, right? Everyone who has a bank account can get internet banking credentials, therefore can make payments via instant EFT, right? So we're in a market in South Africa that is 82% banked. That means that a large majority of our market actually has access to a payment method like this, which is highly contrasted against some of the figures that we see across the card rails. But I think just around like the business model and like the thoughts around linking your bank account, in other markets across the globe, we've seen like many different companies and players like adopt similar methods, right? There's companies like Plaid, TrueLayer, Plaid in the US, TrueLayer in the UK, Ideal in Europe, that are all bank transfer, pay with bank solutions, where users are able to make payments with internet banking credentials, but also business models like Acorns, Betterments. I'm sure you guys know these well, like fractional investing platforms that actually round up your spending and then would actually make a payment via bank transfer as well. So it's a model that's tried and tested from a payment method perspective as well as from a business perspective across other global markets, and it's just about and I think excitingly you guys are bringing that to South Africa as well as Africa, and one of the first to do it in the market as well.
And it's about 3 times cheaper, which means that cost saving can be passed on to the consumer, the customer. So he ends up getting a better quality product at a lower price. Literally everyone's with less fraud. Everyone wins. Card rails are going to be fighting. Cards are going to be fighting a lot against the EFT rails because this is the future, in my opinion. Ricky,
just while we're there, maybe just touch on the banks that we currently cater to. We're obviously planning on bringing more online with the help of Stitch, of course, but the ones that we're currently able to work with right now?
Yeah, so we support the big 5 banks. Stitch supports big 5 banks, so consequently we do too. So that will be Absa, Nedbank, FNB, Capitec, and Standard Bank. All of them except for Capitec, we can make use of completely seamless transactions. So you link your account once, and then the payment goes through automatically every week. With Capitec, it's a little bit more effort involved. The user has to authorize every transaction. So once a week, he gets a notification which he needs to authorize. It's a little bit of a headache, but it is obviously super secure. So some people like that because they enjoy putting in their PIN every week to feel like they're completely in control. But yeah, that's the 5 banks we currently support.
And Ricky, just keeping you there, I also want to, there's a question that's just come in, but we were about to jump into it now. Our app supports 2 really awesome features that allow you to save as you spend. The first feature is the roundup feature. The second one is the add up feature. Maybe just break that down for those watching and just explain how does that actually work?
Sure. So roundup, basically you go into your savings preferences on the app and you select roundup, and then you say, okay, I want to round up to the closest 10, the closest 20, or the closest 50. What that does is it takes every transaction you make, and if you've got the nearest 10 selected, it'll round it up to the closest 10. So let's say your purchase was 11 Rand, it'll round your transaction up to 20. 11 Rand obviously gets paid to the merchant, and that 9 Rand difference from 11 to 20 is what goes into your savings wallet for that week. So the difference between that and add up is add up, you add a flat amount per transaction. So you can select what amount, 2 Rand, 5 Rand, 17 Rand, pick a number, it doesn't matter, it's up to you. And then every transaction you make, it then adds that amount and that goes into your savings wallet. So how upnup works is that every Monday, we run a calculation of the previous week's transactions. And then that's how we work out how much money you're going to save. So if you've got add up selected, let's say you've got add up 10 Rand per transaction and you did 10 transactions, 10 times 10, we'll take $100 and we'll go and buy the Bitcoin for you with $100 on Monday. With roundup, it's slightly more complicated because each amount is going to be different because everything you buy is a different price, obviously. So it can vary. And the way that you stay in control of this, because you don't want this to run away from you and invest 1,000 Rand a week, for example, is you have a max setting. So you can then say, I've got a maximum of 200 Rand a week or 100 Rand or 50 Rand, whatever you choose, and it'll invest for you up to that maximum amount. So you can then be in control and you don't have to worry that your investment is going to run away from you over time. So it leaves the user completely in control.
I'm quite literally like rewarding myself every time I spend. I think we coined a phrase internally, like tipping yourself. So every time I go out and I spend or I do any transaction on my linked account, I'm getting a little something back in return, which is going into my savings account for the future. I mean, that's great. Let's talk about savings. Grant, you told me offline a couple of days ago, we were going through my little presentation and we're talking about the savings culture in South Africa and globally, actually. And you know, we said that, yes, we might have a bad or poor savings culture as a whole, as a collective, but it's not to say that we've never saved or we've never tried to save. But you had a really cool story from when you were much younger, the first time you saved. Maybe just share that with us. I think it was quite a cool little story.
Make me give away my age here, Justin. But I recall being 6 years old, and we had gone to an NBS bank. If you remember NBS Bank, it was the one with like the little parakeet on the logo, yellow branding, and my mom was doing.
Here, Grant, but continue.
And my mom, this was pre-ABSA, right? And my mom was doing, or she was depositing some funds at that point in time. Nothing was digital; it was all analog. She had to fill in a form. They still had a pen with like one of those metal strings on it. And I asked her what she was doing, and she said saving money. And then she gave me 100 Rand, which was a lot of money at the time. And she said, keep this. And I think that actually started my savings culture and journey, because what I did was I went home. I didn't have any formal bank account at that point in time that I was actually interfacing with, or at least like any specific investment as a really young kid. So I put it in a shoe in my cupboard, and the shoe then grew to a shoe box. And like finally, when I was of age, I opened up a bank account and a savings account at the bank, both a savings and check, and started saving money in a more formal banking account. As an adult, started to diversify a lot of what my savings and investment portfolio look like, covering ETFs, cryptocurrency, as well as different bank related and insurance related saving policies as well.
It's quite a great story, because it's always fantastic to hear, you know, when do people start their savings journey? When do they begin? And I think everyone's got such a fascinating way of how they actually first started saving. So yeah, thanks for sharing, Grant. I'm going to keep you there because the Q&As are lighting up. So we have quite a few questions. We have 10 minutes to go. So I want to try and get through as many of them as possible. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but anyone whose questions we have not got to, please feel free to email us, support@upnup.co.za, and it'll come through to our whole team, and we'll respond to it accordingly. But Grant, there are a few, obviously not everybody banks with the big five, as Ricky said earlier. Some guys are with Time Bank, others with the new Bank Zero that launched recently, some with Discovery Bank. We're utilizing the services of Stitch to bring this all together and allow users to connect their accounts. So from your side, plans in the future to work with the bigger banks or the other banks rather, and bring them on board?
Yeah, I think first off, the feedback that we're receiving even through this chat box is great, or through the Q&As is great. What we did as Stitch is when we were looking at go-to-market, building out our product, we looked at the banks that would give us the most coverage in market. And I think generally in South Africa, when you look at the big five banks, so ABSA, Capitec, FNB, Nedbank, and Standard, this gives you plus 95% market coverage. If I'm very accurate with the figure, it's 98% market coverage in South Africa. So that means some of the longer tail banks really serve 2% of the population that we aren't able to serve. And a lot of the research and user interviews that we conducted, it showed that a lot of individuals who bank with some of the longer tail banks also have a bank account with one of the big five banks. But in saying all of this, we have started to see a little bit of demand for some of the longer tail banks. So we are investigating support for longer tail banks. And as soon as we're a little bit more sure from a road mapping perspective what this looks like, we'll be able to share that with you and ask you to share that with your audience and users as well.
Yeah, fantastic, Grant. And I think that we will also have demand coming from our side for these other banks. So we'll definitely be putting pressure on Stitch to make sure that we can cater to those.
Yeah,
Ricky,
share that with us.
There's a few questions here. Seems we have about 3 or 4 people using iOS. So let's just dive into that. We've currently got an Android app. It's on the Google Play Store. It's freely available for download. So anyone with an Android device can connect it. But what about Apple users?
Okay, so brilliant question. What I can tell you is it's not from lack of trying that we don't have an iOS app. So if for those of you familiar with the industry, getting anything through the iOS app store is a nightmare. So we've been caught up there for months with our application, with our app pending review. Yeah. So what we're doing at the moment is we're developing a iOS web app, mobile web app. So it's basically a website that renders into mobile friendly view. That'll be out in the next couple of months, which means that if we are not successful in getting our app through the app store and through the review process, users can go through the web app, which means you don't have to go through the app store. You can just log on to upnupside/iOS, probably something like that will be called. And then you can access the service there. And then we'll deploy a full web app thereafter where users can access it on the computer and they don't actually have to do anything on their phone. So we'll have multiple options available. But for the MVP, we have to be, when we first release the product, you have to be hyper focused with what you release, because otherwise you know it's a spray and pray approach. You really can't focus that much. So it's kind of been a bit of a blessing for us being able to focus on Android and not spread it across 2 different platforms. But that being said, we are working hard to bring you guys this mobile web app for iOS. So yes, iOS users will be able to access the product fairly soon.
Yeah, you just mentioned being super focused, Ricky, and I think that was another question. Why Bitcoin? Why have we gone to market with a product that's micro saving into Bitcoin? Why aren't I saving into cash investment accounts or anything like that?
Simply put, if you are living in an environment in South Africa where you're not making a lot of money, where you're struggling to get by day to day, you saving into rands or you saving into an investment product with your bank, like a fixed saving account or anything, inflation is eating into your gains and you will never get ahead. Let's just be honest about it. So the reason why we specifically chose Bitcoin, A, unregulated, so we could bring it to market quickly. B, best performing asset of the last decade in the world. And C, it is, over the long term, got the highest probability of being the best inflation hedge. So zoom out, like I said earlier, don't focus on the short-term price action. But if you are trying to save into something that respects your time, Bitcoin is absolutely your best bet, because there's no politician who can print more Bitcoin. And that is the root of inflation. Guys, don't let everyone fool you. Inflation is because of the money printer going brr. That's what it's about. Bitcoin, that can't happen, and that's exactly why we chose Bitcoin as a starting point for this app.
And Ricky, it's also, being that super hyper focused, it's also one of the biggest differentiators, isn't it? There are other banks who offer roundup features. I don't think anybody offers an add up feature, but there are other products out there that offer something somewhat similar, but nobody's doing something like this. And that speaks to the hyper focus side of it, right?
Yeah, look, banks are normie, right? Banks are never going to offer Bitcoin, or at least not for the next couple of years. So they'll offer you a roundup, which gives you 3.5% per year on your RAND savings. Inflation is sitting at unofficially 15% thereabouts. You're going backwards 11.5%, 12%. It's a waste of time, to be honest. So this is why we went with Bitcoin. It gives you the best. Look, we're not guaranteeing success here. We're not guaranteeing anything. All we're saying is we've taken a bet here with what has the opportunity, what gives us the best chance of lifting the largest amount of people out of poverty, or at least improving their situation, if they can only invest and save 50, 25, 100 Rand a month. And this is why we've gone with Bitcoin.
Ricky, let's just stay on that topic of features and themes and what someone can invest in. You mentioned this is our MVP. This is the product we brought to the market in the first few months, but it's obviously going to be iterated on. There's obviously going to be a lot to be added to it. What plans do we have to provide other investment vehicles or other features going forward?
Right. So one of the first things we want to look at is a US dollar stablecoin. In South Africa, if you want to have exposure to a US dollar account to protect yourself against Rand devaluation, you have to spend 300 to 500 Rand a month to get a fancy bank account that lets you have US dollars or euros or pounds or whatever. So we see a massive gap here to give normal people who can't afford to pay that much for a fancy bank account access to US dollars. So I think the first product we're going to bring on is a US dollar stablecoin, and we will not be playing around with, look, you get stablecoins and you get stablecoins. So we're going to be going for USDC, which is a fully 100% backed US dollar stablecoin with actual US dollars in a bank account, not a basket of assets. So for example, UST, which is the Terra Luna scam coin that imploded recently, was backed by a whole bunch of different things, as we saw, that ended in tears. We are very, very careful about the assets we choose. So 100% US dollar backed stablecoin will be the only one we look at. And we're looking at either true USD or USDC would be the ones we go for. So that'll be the first one on the roadmap. Then looking at integration with a equities partner that allows people to access fractional ownership of shares is something further on the roadmap. So you can gain something akin to easy equities, right? So you can micro save into your favorite stocks and ETFs. So that's further on the roadmap as well. We understand that people want to get exposure to the S&P 500, NASDAQ, JSE top 40 if they choose. So that'll be things we add on. And then looking at other alternative assets like gold, for example. If you're looking at an inflation hedge, this is probably quite a good one. So yeah, we are definitely looking at increasing the stable of assets that are available. But yeah, all these integrations take time. And there's a few things we need to get right before we can add other assets, which is really streamlining the user experience, allowing users to withdraw their crypto, withdraw their Bitcoin, should I say, actually, and improving that experience, making sure everything works. Because let's not forget, the app that's out there in the market currently is still our very first version. It's still an MVP. So there's a lot that can be improved. We're highly aware of that. And we want to keep improving that as rapidly as possible. And then once we've got a platform that works for our users, then we'll start adding other assets. But all of this, I'm talking about, like, let's say within the next 6 months, we want to start bringing additional asset classes up.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, Grant, just listening to that, you probably, there's so much to take in, but at the same time, like, you guys are one of the most integral partners to what we're doing. And what really excites you about working with upnup at the moment?
I think what you're doing at upnup is so innovative, and the access that it gives, like, the everyday person to, like, investing, micro investing is something that's incredibly important. And being able to empower that or enable that through what we offer, and actually deliver on what your value proposition is around set and forget, is something that's, like, incredibly important to us, and not something that we take lightly. I think you are also one of the first users of our link pay product, so actually in taking that product to market and really getting into the thicker around this, giving us product feedback around it. You're a really important partner of ours. I think also, to zoom out a little bit, and Ricky spoke about it earlier, what this experience would look like without using Stitch as the payment rail. Debit orders or card, it would either be, like, very, very expensive or just not possible. So it's, like, the innovative idea of upnup, as well as the technology from Stitch, that really make something like this super, super possible. So we're very, very excited about the partnership.
And Grant, just on that, to the average person who doesn't work in this industry, in the payments industry as such, I don't think they appreciate how convoluted and complex and ridiculous the payment rails, the existing legacy payment rails are. Debit orders, the card rails are, I mean, to put it lightly, as someone who's only recently come into payments and having a look at this, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And the simplicity you get from the EFT rail that you guys are providing, that comes all the way, filters all the way through to the consumer. It's just a far, far better solution. And like you said, it would not be possible without being able to do that EFT rail, because if you have to add 3% on top of your margin to pass it on to your consumer, your business ends up not being viable, because that low end consumer who can't afford to pay a 8 to 10% premium on the assets, especially on micro investing, it just doesn't make sense. Yeah, the EFT rail and the service you guys provide is integral to this. It wouldn't be possible without it.
Yeah, I could probably go on about this around variable recurring payments and, like, what is available in Europe and the US and in SA.
Let's hold that, Grant, because we do have to wrap up in a moment, but I have one more question, which I think is probably the most important question, especially for people from overseas that might be watching. But Ricky, the app currently, it's available in the Android store, as we said, but is there a limit? Do you have to be South African? What's the limitations on that?
Yeah, so currently the limitation is you have to be South African and have a South African bank account. And that's not because we discriminate against foreigners, or you have to be a citizen for that matter. It's just our other backend provider who does our wallets, Ukesh. When we built the MVP, there was quite a lot of complexity that came with the adding a passport as your KYC component. So that has subsequently there's a bunch of work's been done on that, and we're looking at integrating that quite soon, which means that foreigners who have a South African bank account will be able to use our service as well. So that opens it up to a much larger audience. It's very close to home for me. My wife is British. She'd love to use the service. Obviously, she has a South African bank account that lives in South Africa. So yeah, it's definitely something we want to roll out ASAP.
And obviously there are plans in the pipeline to expand the offering to, we spoke earlier about being Africa's first micro savings and investment platform of a kind. So there are obviously plans to expand this and keep onboarding more and more as we go. So
yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Justin, on that, and I keep chipping in. I'm sorry, but this is why also one of the reasons why we chose Stitch, because Stitch has got an African focus as well, and are moving into already and have a footprint in other African countries. So this makes it a lot easier for us to move into places like Nigeria, for example, where Stitch has already got a footprint, and the future countries that they expand into. And the same goes for Ukesh, our other backend provider, also have an African footprint. So yeah, we're looking at expanding within Africa for sure.
So, I mean, there's still, you guys can see them. There's so many more questions in the Q&A. There's a couple that have come through privately in the chat as well, but unfortunately we can't get to all of them, and we are out of time. But as I said earlier, please direct your questions to support@upnup.co.za. We'll answer them in no time, so you'll get an answer pretty quickly. But yeah, thanks to everyone for tuning in. This was the first webinar we've done. I think it's been really insightful and fantastic, and thanks to Grant and Ricky for their time as well. But yeah, we look forward to welcoming you all back to the next one, and I'm sure it'll be just as enticing, just as fun and exciting, as well as engaging and useful. So thanks, guys. Thanks for joining, and follow us on social media, follow us on our website, upnup.co.za, and feel free to, as I said, get in touch by email. We'll see you guys soon. Cheerio. Bye.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.